Molto and Helix, Mars, Red and Wetsuit, Televiper will spot ya and then launch a member. Rage Viper, Lizard Viper, on a ferry to Lego to kill ya in the Gulf of Mexico. There's a place called Cobra Island. That's where you wanna go to get the latest intel. Bodies on the set, weapons firing in your hands. They'll be taken out by androids who will crash land. And we're talking some Joe.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all about us over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. And a big thanks and hello to all of our new listeners that have been subscribing on YouTube. Much appreciated. Today, we will be looking at G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, 307, which is released 19th of June 2024. And joining me, as always, it's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn. How are you?
I'm well. Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners, and hello, new listeners. Thank you for listening. Mark, I'm coming to you for this episode from a hotel room in California, not my normal home in Massachusetts, because I'm doing a little holiday. That's your word. I'm doing a little vacation visiting family.
Very good. You still sound good, Tim. It's even though you're on the fly, I don't think anyone would be any the wiser.
It's just me and my laptop and a couple of pillows.
Very good. Right. I want to get right into 307, but I do feel it would be remiss to not remark a little bit on some of the news that we've had. The Kickstarter for the hardcovers has finished, and it's finished big, Tim. We well past the $3 million mark. Biggest comic Kickstarter ever, beating Neil Gaiman's Good Omens, I believe it was. Thoughts? Reaction?
Yes. Like everyone, I mean, I was blown away when it was funded in 6 minutes and when it hit 1 million in one day, and then it just kept going. So I backed it. The thing that I'm most excited about is not me as a reader being able to buy this or read this. I have the issues, and as much as I love reprints, I want the old ads. I want the smell of the old paper. It's a Marvel product. I want, the Marvel stuff. Mm-hmm. But as a retailer, someone who owns a comic book shop, I'm really excited about selling the compendia, but not the hardcovers, because they're great, but they'll be very expensive. I really want to sell the soft covers, mm-hmm. particularly Compendium 1. And as a backer of the Kickstarter at the retailer tier, I got a little note the day that the Kickstarter ended, and it said, thank you again for backing the G.I. Joe Arah campaign. Your contributions have made this campaign an incredible success. Due to the large numbers of orders we've received, we will need to print these books sooner than expected. Huh. And that is both exciting. This is not me breaking news that they're going to ship early. That's not what this is. What this means is, I think, Skbound with the printer has to make a different deal because they were expecting to print, 3 of something, and now they're going to print 9 of something, whatever the multiples are. And it takes longer to print. And if you are printing a book, you are renting press time on the presses, and other publishers have other issues and graphic novels booked, scheduled. And in order to print more books and ship more books on time, I think from this bit of email, Skbound needs to sort of start earlier. So I find that really interesting. It makes me a little bit nervous because I'm still not fully confident that the reproduction of the files is going to be everything I want them to be. And,
Mm-hmm.
When you take old comics and you print them anew, if you don't have the original art, if you don't have the original files, and it seems like Skbound does, some of the pages or covers might come from a less high quality source, and this is something that publishers have gotten better and better at in the last many years. But the thing that trips me up here is that Marvel and IDW and DC and other publishers have for many years both printed new comics and then promptly after printed graphic novel collections of those new comics. That's not a big deal. Those files are pretty analogous. Skbound has never republished something that's old. Everything Skbound has published, Walking Dead, Invincible, Stealth, Outer Darkness, is something that they previously published 6 months or a year earlier. Skbound has never published something that's 40 years old and that comes from another publisher, and that involves obtaining assets from that other publisher. And I think they can do a great job, and we'll never know that anything was at stake. The book should just look great. But until I see it, or until there's some announcement about sourcing the highest quality materials, mm-hmm. I'm a little nervous. And the fact that they are going to start printing these earlier, and there are,
mm-hmm.
3,000
less time. Yeah.
3,000 pages to go through 4 compendia and make sure every, all the black and white artwork, all the color files. So that's my long response to the recent news of the Kickstarter. Mark?
Mm. Although, interestingly, they said that they would be remastering the special, the McFarlane G.I. Joe special #1, although they've not quite indicated what that involves, but I think there might be something a little bit more involved happening with that one.
Just like a little reminder for everyone, to remaster something is to just make a new master. And that word doesn't imply necessarily high quality or higher quality. Like if I drew a comic when I was in 6th grade in color with, markers, and I made a black and white photocopy, and then I lost the original artwork, and then I wanted to make new copies. I wanted to make new masters. I wanted to make a new master copy from which to make copies. And I had to make copies of my black and white copies. I have remastered it. That's not to say it's a good remastering. Hey, Skbound, I own an original art page from the McFarlane Nelson special. You want to scan? Let me know if you don't have a good copy of that page.
I might be being lazy with my language as well. I can't remember the exact term that they used, but they indicated they were doing something with it. And the other bit of news that we've not yet talked about, apart from over WhatsApp, was in the other side of the world on the Energon universe. There's some big news about G.I. Joe #1, and maybe we'll leave discussing that to another time. But just in the world of news, the Arun Singh, VP of Brand Editorial at Skbound, said that next week, which might be this week, depending on when I release this episode, there will be a very, very cool announcement from Skbound. Something I'm really proud we're able to make happen for the fandom. I've got theories on what those things might be, but again, won't get into it here. But more cool stuff to come.
Just in 2 words, the announcement of the ongoing G.I. Joe Energon universe. Yes, awesome.
Very good. Right, back to issue 307. It comes to us from the writer Larry Hama, pencils from Paul Pelletier, inks Tony Kordos, colorist Francesco Segala with Sabrina del Grosso, the flatter. Sounds like Pliny the Elder or something, for Sabrina the flatter. Letterer Pat Brousseau, editor Alex Antone, publication design Jillian Crab, creative consultant Diana Davis. On to covers, Tim.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
There are 3 different covers for this comic book. Cover A is drawn by Andy Kubert with colors by Brad Anderson. It's great. It is a waist-up portrait of Destro and the Baroness. Destro is centered, looking straight at us, intense. His rifle, submachine gun, giant oversized blaster, is up against his chest. In front of him is the Baroness. She is half turned away, but looking at us. She is holding a pistol, and the background is a hard wall right behind them that's mostly in shadow with some bullet holes in it. What's cool about this cover, and this cover is just a exciting character shot pinup. There's no story element to this cover. It's just a cool drawing of cool characters. And in general, I don't want those. But I do think since Destro hasn't shown up on the covers yet, and this is such a good drawing, I'll allow it. But also, I can't quite put my finger on this, but something about this cover, because it's so boldly drawn and direct, reminds me of a cover that may have been on the Marvel run in the 80s. I know this looks like a lot of variant covers we've seen at Skbound and IDW in the last 10 years, but something about this, I thought, this feels a little bit like the cover to Marvel 38. Just a cool character, and I know the cover to Marvel 38 has story.
Mm-hmm. That's the one with the yellow background, Destro pointing a pistol at Storm Shadow.
Yes. And what's also striking about this cover is that there are a couple, despite the fact that the 2 characters are standing pretty straight, there are some strong diagonals here. There's the diagonal behind Destro where the shadow, all the black, becomes the sort of light on the wall. There's the diagonal of how he's holding his gun. There's the diagonal of how the Baroness is holding her pistol. Destro's left hand is on Baroness's back, so there's a little bit of comfort, of familiarity. There's a little bit of sexiness happening here, a little bit of relationship. Baroness is cool and dangerous here. She's not, overly sexy like some of those covers I don't love. There is a shadow, and this is in the inking, on Destro's rifle and his hand that comes from the Baroness's gun. And that tells me that Kubert is thinking very clearly about where the light is coming from. And Brad Anderson is obliging him by treating the colors similarly. There is a red highlight on the right top edge of the Baroness's pistol, which I really love because it pulls her pistol forward so that it doesn't sort of blend in with Destro's shoulder and his blaster. Similarly, she is slightly underlit by a softer pinkish light on the bottom right of the cover, her hair and her back and Destro's hand. And just one more detail that I really like here is Destro's 3 wrist rockets. Kubert has inked a little bit of spotted black underneath 3 of the sort of vertical fins, and with a consistent diagonal, Brad Anderson is coloring the base red of those rockets a darker red to continue the coming from the top left light source, such that the shadows on these rockets goes from, light source northwest, shadows southeast. And it's just cool.
Just to mention as well, while we were talking about some classic G.I. Joe covers that it might make you, they might make you think of, there's 116, which is Destro Search and Destroy Part 1 by Michael Golden. Destro against a brick wall with the wanted poster in the background. And a cover that echoed that, actually, which was Sins of the Mother Part 1, G.I. Joe America's Elite, issue 21, which had Baroness against a brick wall and a wanted poster.
Yes, and I'll do one more, which is the cover B to IDW's 2013 G.I. Joe Special Missions issue number 1. This was the series by Dixon and Gulacy, but this variant cover was by Brandon Peterson. It's just the Baroness. There's no Destro in it, but she is roughly the same size on that cover as on this one. And she is in front of a sort of brownish, I think it's more stone wall, but she's colored relatively similarly here.
Mhm. It's a bit of a shame that this is more of a sort of a pin-up type cover, but, you know, we've seen, I think, 10 covers so far in terms of what's been published and what's to come. And I think this is the only one that would sort of fit into that criteria. The others are very much sort of driven by story. So it is a bit of a one-off, and I think we are enjoying, a golden period in terms of having this great cover art from a great cover artist that is linking back to the story, which we have not seen in a good long while.
I somewhat agree. I feel like, 301 wasn't story, but 302 definitely was. Was 303 the one with Serpentor Khan, or was that 304? I feel like now more of the Kubert covers have been kind of pinups. Was it last month, Snake Eyes standing in front of the red with a couple of dead vipers?
That's right. That's sort of like the training kind of.
Yeah, that's sort of half and
sequence.
half. That's like
Yeah.
half story because it does correspond, but sort of half pinup. I suspect that whether it's Kubert making a decision, whether it's an editor making a suggestion, it's 2024, and the general style of covers is more pinup, less story, because it pops better, and I'm okay with that. Cover B is this same one in black and white. Your store can order as many or as few copies as it wants. It's not rare. It's not a ratio variant. Cover C is the 1 in 10 ratio variant. It's drawn by Brad Walker with colors by interior color artist Francesco Segala. This continues the variant covers that this team has done with a Joe in the front and a Cobra in the background. The Cobra is sort of much larger and head and shoulders only, looming, not physically there. In this case, it's Firefly in the background and CoverGirl in the foreground. She's standing with her feet planted. We see her from head to knees, and she's spraying with her machine gun. Behind her is the Wolverine, the tank, and then Firefly is at a diagonal as if he's reacting, sort of not like he's knocked off balance, but he is leaning back, or we are looking up at him a bit. There's some really cool things happening on this cover. Firefly is pushed back a little bit because his gray is a cool gray. There's some purple in it, which is distinct from all of the yellow that's in CoverGirl and the Wolverine. Of course, they're separated by the explosion. The Wolverine itself is drawn a little bit at an up angle. We're only as tall as the top of the treads. And I love the perspective on Firefly's machine gun, where the handle and the clip are slightly in 2-point perspective. They're a little bit stretched, a little bit like fisheye. It's very cool.
Then for retailer exclusives, we've got a few this month. There's a Scott Godlewski from Final Order Comics, which is a Snake Eyes all in black but framed by sort of dripping red blood, and this is a bit of a companion piece to the Storm Shadow that he did all in white for 301. There's Dan Quintana, which is a sort of Michelle Pfeifferish looking Baroness with a snake wrapped around a pistol. It's all looking a bit CGI and photoshopped and not especially pleasant to look at. Some clever soul traced back the model for this image to an Italian model called Riae, Riae, if you want to have a look. Then East Side Comics has John Royal with Alonso Espinosa, aka Pixel Tool, which is Jinx on a white background, and this is actually a repurposing of a 2020 commission that was done, so not a brand new image. Then there is a third Baroness cover, Lyrics Lee for KRS Comics, which is a kind of standard pin-up of Baroness looking a little bit sexy with fingers to her lips. Shh. So yeah, 3 covers for Baroness this month, 2 of which are sort of not especially interesting pin-ups. Probably too many Baroness covers.
Why are there so many covers of Baroness? 'Cause she's on the other side. Cobra are villains, my only conclusion. The costume makes us wide-eyed. So we've been shown, and some people think she is fit, though it is wrong blatantly. Someday we'll complete it, the cover collection, the Baroness, her leather, and me.
I gotta say that Dan Quintana cover, the Cobra logo is on the Baroness's costume is doesn't it's not on model. I'll say that.
Okay, let's summarize what happened in this issue with a spoiler-heavy plot breakdown.
Plot breakdown.
On Cobra Island, a Revanche stealth bomber lands for inspection by Serpentor Khan. It has vertical racks on the bomb bay, the kind that might be able to drop something bat-shaped onto a battlefield. Observing this are Helix, Multo, Muskrat and Wetsuit, who are feeding the intel back to the pit. Duke concludes that Serpentor must be going after Springfield next. The Joe's transmission is noticed and a motorized task force is sent that tracks down the team to the tree line. The Joes fight against the Cobra squad. They scoop up a laser Viper's gear and use it with particularly devastating effects. But as the Joes make it to the shore, 2 upgraded casino bats incapacitate the Joe team. Meanwhile, Mainframe picks up activity from surveillance on Springfield. They see the Springfield PD firing on Dawn's parents. Duke breaks the bad news to Dawn in the canteen, but she is reassured that she still has family as an Arashikage. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Cobra Commander expresses his annoyance that with the death of the Morenos, he has lost leverage against Dawn. Finally, in Scotland, Destro's clay pigeon shoot is interrupted by the arrival of the real Zartan, who proposes an alliance. Where would you like to start, Tim?
Just an overview. I really like this issue, and the things about the previous issue that didn't work for me were all addressed in this issue.
Oh, interesting. My overview, I felt I almost preferred the previous issue.
Wow.
The art is good and it's very capable. I'm not entirely sure that necessarily the color's completely sympathetic. And in terms of just the overall issue, it felt like it was a bit of a slow moving issue that we're not maybe moving quite as the trajectory, at the clip that I'd like to see. Do you know what I thought about the artwork, or specifically kind of the pencils and inks for this issue? What it put me in mind of? Tom Grummett from DC Comics, particularly like his Robin work in the mid-90s.
Yeah. Yes. There's a warmth to how both these artists draw, and their facial shapes and proportions are not unsimilar.
I think it was Dawn Moreno's sad face that probably made me twig.
Yes, yes. So, the previous issue, I thought that Pelletier, his stuff was good, but he didn't seem comfortable yet with these characters and all this tech. And this issue, just subtly all over the place. I feel like everything just looked, 2% better or more confident. In the previous issue, I thought that Segala's very cool stylized color approach, which is both dot screen textures for some characters, but a lot of backgrounds. So you see a grid of dots, even if they are a color, and they sort of disappear into the color around them. Both that and also that Segala changes palette for every scene. So, Serpentor Khan and Dr. Mindbender, where they are, might be very reddish, and then we cut to some ninjas on a roof, and that might be very purple violet, and then we cut to some Joes somewhere else that might be very yellow green. We cut to someone else that might be very blue. That was happening in the previous issue, and I felt like it was a mismatch for Pelletier's art because Pelletier and Kordos are using a lot less black ink than Chris Mooneyham did. And in the previous issues, Chris Mooneyham's got so much black ink on every page and every panel that it properly weighs down and balances the sort of aggressive color approach. And with so much more of the page left white in the last issue, I felt like the colors were in some scenes distracting or disagreeing. I think there was particularly a scene with Serpentor Khan and maybe Mindbender and a couple Cobras where the sort of magentas and reds and purples were feeling sort of becoming too objective. Like, what's going on in this scene? These characters are weird, as opposed to stylistically subjective. And I feel like Segala backed off a little bit here, or chose colors that sort of agreed a little bit more, sort of scene to scene. And then lastly, in the previous issue, I felt like though there were a lot of different scenes and they were all mostly 3 pages and something happened in each of them, not much happened in each of them. And it felt like there was a lot of a lack of forward momentum, sort of a transitional issue. And in this issue, Mark, here are some things that happen. We have a much bigger hint of Serpentor Khan's plan to invade Springfield. We have a bit of sort of not a closure on the loop of Dawn's parents, but we have a much more definitive, it's like, we're not sure that they're dead, but there are more indications here and more characters are reacting. We have the Joes take out some Cobras using their own weapons too, which is always fun. We've got one more line of dialogue from Snake Eyes, which I'm sure we'll get into. And we have, the real Zartan is now sort of doing something in terms of Destro and Baroness, whereas I feel like in the previous issue, he shows up. Zartan's there, but sort of they haven't properly connected yet.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, the only thing that disappointed me in this issue was the letters page, where
okay.
this is an exaggeration, but I feel like every letter is someone saying, "Are the Energon Universe comics different from the Real American Hero comics?" And
yes.
Yes, and the answer for 8 months has been yes. But I have to remind myself that I read comics every day of the week. I sell comics. I talk about comics, and some people follow them much more casually or are getting into them in a big way, but have really been out of the game for a while. And, if you asked me, I don't know the subtitles of all the Harry Potter books or movies, and I certainly can't do them in order if I can do half them. And some people might think that's nuts. And so, everyone can only follow so many things.
Could write a book, Tim Finn and the Confusing Reading Order. Anyway, but yeah, talking about the letters though, I thought they were quite brave. They're not afraid to write, publish negative letters. There was one in particular here from Turo Leitinen, who I wrote down the phrase here on my notes, inverted commas, "Please just stop." So about as negative as you can get, which I think it's people are allowed to have different opinions. Some people are a bit more direct than others, but that's about as direct as you get. And hats off for them for tackling it head on.
Yes. So should we get into some specific comments or some specific scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I said initially that it felt like it moved very slowly, but to be fair to the comic and to your earlier comments, There is a big action sequence here and probably possibly the biggest action sequence in terms of number of Joes, number of Cobras that we've seen in the series almost so far, in terms of that big shootout. While we're talking about that, maybe I'll linger on a thought here about the troopers on Cobra Island. I did think that the troopers are quite Cobra Troopery. Then there's not necessarily, apart from them maybe having a tentacle or two here and there, they don't necessarily act much different to regular Cobra Troopers for a lot of the time, and the Joes don't necessarily react to them that much differently than they would a regular Cobra Trooper. They're not going, oh my god, that guy's got a tentacle arm, or whatever. I think a key point of differentiation here, though, is that it possibly, by them being zombies, it does make them more palatable to kill. We've got a shot to the head of a range viper, and there's a knife to the face of a laser viper, which, were they human, I think that would possibly land differently in terms of the feeling of that scene.
That is an interesting observation. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe the next time I see Larry Hama, I'll say, hey, do you think that in turning a bunch of Cobras into zombies, it'd be easier to dispatch them on panel? Because, we're all used to this Transformers comparison where Transformers can tear each other apart, but, it doesn't count because it's oil, it's not blood. I noted with that same scene that you're referring to that we've got quite a variety of toys, of Hasbro toys. There's a range viper, 2 stingers, there's a Hiss 2, a ferret, and I forget, a Hiss 4, a Hiss 7, a Hiss 26.
A night attack stinger, a mamba, fang 2, range viper, laser viper, all manner of figures and toy vehicles.
Yeah, and that first panel where Paul Pelletier is drawing a stinger, it's not the best drawn stinger. You can tell it's a stinger, and you can tell it's it's a Jeep. It's a 4-wheel thing with 4 missiles. The missiles, the 2 center ones, I want to be a little higher. The 4 missiles, I want to be a hair closer to each other. The proportions on the windshield versus the door versus the angle of the door versus the headlights versus the, space between the tires. I'd love them to be just a little bit adjusted. But stingers are hard to draw. This book is hard to draw. There's hundreds of characters and vehicles. This is Pelletier's second issue. And he gets a lot of points for me because, what else is happening in this panel? I can see some of the casino. The camera is only as high as the hood of a car. Mm-hmm. So he's picking a camera angle that adds some oomph and pep to vehicles coming at you. And elsewhere on this page is a handsomely drawn zombie Serpentor Khan. So, and he said to us in our interview with him, he is more comfortable drawing soft things, people and clothing, mm-hmm. and less comfortable drawing hardware and tech. And because I do see a step up from the last issue to this issue, I say that's the right direction. And, when every single issue of Real American Hero for the last 15 years, I feel like the editor at the beginning of the letters page has said, hey there, Joe fans, didn't artist name do a good job on this issue? And, let's not forget living legend, Lethal Larry Hama. And I always think that's fun. We're in this post Stan Lee world where when you write editorially in a comic book, you sort of celebrate everything. Cool. But I actually agreed and thought it was well earned when in the letters page of 307, editor Alex Antone says, "We hope you enjoyed this issue. I think you can see that Paul and Tony are really starting to hit their stride." Round of applause for the whole team. I thought, no, he's not just, thumbs up on everything for the sake of it's a comic book. These guys actually did get better. And I feel confident that they'll get a little better with the next issue.
Very good. I did have a tiny nitpick about this panel that we were looking at with all of those vehicles driving towards us, which is in the color where the hiss tank with the number 624 looks like it's coloured to be a hiss 2, and we definitely have hiss 2s in this story, but I think this one was meant to be a hiss 1.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. All right, a couple of things. Turn back 2 pages. Page 3 has the stealth bomber land, and Serpentor Khan is talking to the Revenge guy. And in the middle, Serpentor says, "Excellent." And then on the bottom, "And when can you deliver if we order more?" And I like all this. There's a big white rectangle of negative space to the left of this panel. And it's not bad, but it's a little, it's slightly asking a question. And then there's sort of a wider than normal gap between this little panel of Serpentor Khan's face and the next panel, where you see his nose and his mouth, and then the Revenge guy saying, "We have a production plan outside of Baton Rouge." And that these 2 panels on the bottom are sitting on the bottom of a black rectangle that goes all the way around the page. Something compositionally in terms of negative space about the bottom third of this page just felt a little out of balance and a little less than optimized. Nothing is unclear, nothing is badly drawn, but I thought, just keep drawing Serpentor. Draw his shoulder and what's to the left of him. Let's see a little bit more of his face on that final panel.
And this sort of sequence here sort of seems to kind of be, creating a little bit of mystery about whatever could these vertical racks be for that have been built for his specifications. And if we couldn't figure it out by ourselves, at the back of the book, there is a preview cover of 308, which gives us quite a big hint as to what is being planned.
Yes. Talk about a story cover. Something else a couple other little things that jump out at me in this issue. On page 4, this is the scene where Helix, Molto, Muskrat, and Wetsuit are on the island, and it starts with a POV matte shot of binoculars.
Mm-hmm.
In panel 2 and in panel 4, Francesco Segala does something just really lovely, which is he fills the background silhouette of jungle brush of trees and vines with a light green that is still darker than the light green of the sky. And he does so with a screen pattern with dots. And that is the kind of thing that in the IDW A Real American Hero, a series where I did not like the color, that would have been, gradients and highlights and shiny. And this really gets pushed back, and you see it, and it adds a lot, and it agrees with these 2 panels, but it doesn't overpower the foreground. It doesn't announce itself. I love it. I did want to ask you, Mark, remind me, Mark, what was the deal with Helix's costume? There are 2 of them?
Yeah, so originally it was created for the video game / IDW comics. And then I think her introduction into the Arah continuity was via the Silent Option comic, which was drawn by Netho Diaz. So he did a sort of reinvention of that costume. But then when she subsequently reappeared in the pages of Arah, I think they tended to use her previous costume.
So which one are we seeing here? I know we don't see it enough on page 4, but jumping ahead a few pages, which one are we seeing here? I guess where she sticks the knife in the Laser Viper's face?
It's probably closer to the modern one because it doesn't have all of the corset stuff going on.
Okay.
So I think this is closer to the Netho Diaz one, but I'm not too sure if it's identical.
Okay. While we're on that scene, that page and the next page, this bit where Helix grabs the Laser Viper's backpack and says, "I'm policing up some gear here." I think that's a Hama time.
Stop! Hammer time!
A bit of dialogue that we don't see as much as some other Larry Hama dialogue isms. But 2, I love this because we've rarely seen a Joe grabs a Cobra weapon in G.I. Joe comics, even though realistically that might happen in battle a lot. But also, I feel like every kid did this when they played with games. You know, you bash two figures against each other, one's punching, they grab the other guy's weapon, or they pull it off, or it falls off, or, you know, they're infiltrating the Cobra base. And this moment feels, finally, the comic is doing what I did when I was 10.
And this Laser Viper's gear is about as overpowered as you can get, really. We've not seen Laser Vipers very much in the comic. I guess they were kind of envisioned as like space troopers, really, but so not maybe used for terrestrial environments. But here, this laser pack is cutting a Hiss 2 in half. So
yeah, I love it. And also, there's something that I think Paul Pelletier is doing on his own. I can't imagine that it's in the plot. Maybe it's an editorial comment. But correct me if I'm wrong, the Laser Viper figure, the sort of blue-gray shoulder strap and chest plate with the circle on it, that is sculpted onto the torso of the Laser Viper action figure. And it is the gray backpack with the two over-shoulder lasers and the two under-shoulder handles that, clips on. And so Helix here has both put the backpack on, but also the shoulder straps and the chest plate, as if that is part of the assembly. And maybe in the original sculpt sheet at Hasbro in 1989 or whatever, that's sort of how they envisioned it. But it's this sort of extra thing that's happening here, which I appreciate in terms of paying attention, or if it's a mistake, it still works. And B, it feels just like one step more sort of toyetic because, if you've ever played laser tag, real laser tag, you might put a thing over your shoulders and then you've got a chest plate and that's where people are aiming.
Yep.
So, Larry Hama does not play with his G.I. Joe toys, the ones that he's been given over the years. He does have some on his desk at times. But this scene feels like him, quote, playing with his toys. Okay, jump back to page 5. There's a bit of writing that I really like. We're in the pit, and Duke, Mainframe, and Stalker are talking to each other after getting intel from Helix. And Stalker says, "It looks like Serpentor is ramping up his game. Who or what is he going to use a heavy stealth bomber against? Is he going to come after the pit? All he would do is flatten the Quonset huts up top." And then Duke says, "No, not the pit. He's going after Springfield." And I love this exchange because Stalker makes a guess and gets something wrong. And I don't mean like Stalker is fallible, how realistic, but there's a mystery here and a character or two are reasoning it through.
Yep.
And we know what this is for. The Joes don't. And so this scene has some gears turning where the Joes figure it out. And I feel like when writing, sometimes a writer, a kid, an inexperienced writer, would leave this scene out. It wouldn't occur to them. The Joes would just get it correct. Or Serpentor Khan would just announce it to the Joes or to the world. And then the Joes would know, and the Joes are caught up. But with this one panel, Hama stretches out the sort of business of figuring it out and the mystery for just a little bit. It's not even tension, but and then with that final panel on the page where Duke turns to us and looks a little past us with a furrowed brow. And I love that light blue rim light on the left side of his head and his nose that Segala does. I love that. Duke gets to be an expert. He gets to be cool. And this isn't, he's not correcting or swatting down Stalker. He's being the brilliant, Joe leader that he is. And he's figuring something out from available evidence. And it's a really small thing, these two panels, but I thought, yeah.
And then this scene sort of leads into that continuation about Dawn's parents. We sort of commented on the fact that it had kind of been left quite ambiguous in the previous issue when the Cobra police were firing on the car, and these, scenes in this book sort of, they don't give us necessarily a definitive answer to that, but they, there's a heavy implication there that Dawn's parents are dead. We got the initial shootout, and then when it's broken to Dawn by Duke, it does sound a little bit, it sounds a little bit more conclusive. The satellite imagery is damning, to say the least. I think we have to assume the worst.
And Cobra Commander talks about it.
Yeah, and then Cobra Commander, as long as the Morenos were alive, we still had some leverage against Dawn, but now we have nothing to use against her. And you'd think if anyone would know, then Cobra would know, because they're there on the scene, unless he's been given some half information and jumped to conclusions, which is also possible.
I wouldn't be surprised if in 1 or 6 issues we see her parents hiding in a sewer, in a someone's basement in Springfield. They're hitchhiking a mile outside of Springfield. They're wounded or they're not wounded, and one of them says something like, thank goodness the back seats of our car have armor plating, because it used to be a police car or something. There is still room for Hama to bring that out. I wouldn't love it, but we've seen this kind of misdirect or retcon before, and B, it's powerful either way. Dawn is sad and then gets angry and will probably try to take her revenge on Cobra, or Dawn is sad and angry and tries to take her revenge on Cobra, and then later she gets to be reunited with her parents. And that does belie some credulity, and I can imagine 3 issues after that, a letter where someone says, come on, that belies credulity. But yeah, and this scene where Cobra Commander is doing a bit of damage control.
Well, this is a fine pickle you've got us into. How you turned a simple traffic stop into a bloodbath boggles my mind.
And we see the soldier, Cobra soldier, or he's talking to the cop who did the traffic stop. This reminds me of the 1 or 2 times we've seen Cobra Commander on the defensive because he's gone too far.
Yeah.
In Trucial Abysmia, around issue 113, Cobra Commander, one of his soldiers has killed a bunch of Joes, and he's saying to the Saw Viper or someone, or Tomax and Zaymot, he's saying something like, oh man, the Joes are going to really come after us for this. And on the one hand, I don't love that because, he's a terrible, vicious terrorist, and he shouldn't be concerned about collateral damage or, 1 or 2 deaths when he's threatening the world or all of the Joes. But on the other hand, he's smart enough to pick his battles.
Yeah. And there was an interesting eagle-eyed person over on the His Tank board, Auto Decept, who noticed a potential error detector here. That Mainframe says that Dawn's parents' car was registered to a Hector Moreno, but Dawn's father's name was Oscar in 303. But I think we can no-prose that away without too much, head scratching. That possibly it was not registered to him. Maybe it was a brother or something, or it might be that it's his middle name or a nickname, and Oscar is just his middle name or just the nickname that he gets referred to. So plenty of ways to sort of explain that one away without too much to do.
There's something else that happens on page 5. There's 2 things that happen on page 5 that I like. So continuing this bit where Stalker has a guess, but he knows he's wrong, Duke corrects him, and that lets Duke be smart, lets the Joes be smart. And then you turn the page, and now that we're talking about Springfield, that gives some track, lays some track. So Duke can say to Mainframe, what about Springfield? Anything interesting? And then Mainframe can say, oh yeah, some cops shot a car. And this scene would still work. if Stalker and Duke weren't talking about motivation for Cobra right now, but it's one more little step in this stretch of motivation. You know, Duke could just at any point say to Mainframe, "Hey, anything going on in Springfield? You want to pull up some satellite imagery? Anything unusual?" But I like here that there's this logical progression. Like, no, Stalker, it's not that. It's Springfield. Let's look into Springfield. Oh, some cops shot up a car in Springfield.
Yeah.
So I like that in terms of writing. And then on the bottom of page 5, where Mainframe has 2 word balloons and Duke has 1, Pelletier has drawn a large panel that's the width of the page, but he's cut it in half. So panel 4 actually becomes panels 4 and 5. And there isn't any sort of trick or double take. It's not like one character appears in both because they're moving across the room. In this case, all Pelletier is doing is taking a moment and dividing it in time differently. You read these 2 panels differently because of that gutter. You stop, I think.
Beat. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a beat, so that you sort of pause before you get to Duke's Lord Have Mercy. And letterer Pat Brousseau, I think following Hama's plot, makes that font a little smaller because Duke is speaking more quietly. So that's just a nice bit of comics business. We should talk about the ninjas in this issue. They do just a little bit, but I bet you have a reaction.
Well, they're sort of rallying around Dawn, sort of comforting her, letting her know that, you know, even if she is potentially now an orphan, she's not on her own, because as Snake Eyes says in this week's Snake Eyes Talking,
Snake Eyes talking, Snake Eyes talking about things he wants to say.
He says, "You still have family, Dawn." And Tommy Storm Shadow kind of, you know, doubles down on that. You're an Arashikage now. But one of the things I also noticed here was the reaction here as the ninjas are approaching. It's Scarlet that comes up to her, and Dawn says, "Oh, Scarlet," and, you know, goes for the hug of the comforts from Scarlet. "I'm an orphan now. That was all the family I had." And let's not forget that there's some confusing thoughts and feelings and memories that are still rattling around Dawn's head potentially, in terms of her relationship with feelings towards Scarlet.
My reaction to this was that it's a young woman feeling emotional, and she might be comfortable reaching out to a woman, or she might be comfortable reaching out to someone who reminds her of her mom. You know, like when kids get sad, sometimes they want a hug from their mom before they want a hug from their dad. Yeah. And I had forgotten the bit you just said about what's in Dawn's head from the brainwave scanner, but I think it could also be both. The final panel of this page, where Tommy says that cool thing, Paul Pelletier draws Tommy with the eyes of a Japanese man, and I appreciate that, because as I have noted in some previous episodes, many great comic book artists who have drawn G.I. Joe draw Tommy with sort of Western eyes. I can't quite get the lack of an epithetical fold, so I appreciate that here.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and we're talking just in terms of ink on a page. It's very subtle, isn't it? It's a couple of lines. It's the angle of the line. It's not necessarily easy to do when you're dealing with a small panel. So yeah, hats off for that one.
Okay, so now let's talk about the Destro subplot. I'll just point out a factual thing, and then you talk about how the scene goes. When Zartan reveals himself on the third to last page of the issue, I just want to note that Paul Pelletier is doing it with some wiggly lines. And I don't remember how it was depicted in the IDW run, but I do remember in the Marvel run that when Zartan would use his personal, is it belt-mounted holographic projector, there would be Kirby crackle, which is to say circles, dots, big dots, the black ones and yellow ones.
And a kind of
around him.
orangey, yellowy glow.
Yeah. And here is some wiggly lines that are sort of white and kind of a blue glow. And this is not me wagging my finger saying the artist and colorist got it wrong. This is me saying, oh, that's different. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind if it matched the old stuff, but All right, so how's this scene going for you?
I mean, it's sort of progressing in the direction that you'd expect, really. I think Zartan picked up that on the clues that Revanche were out to get him, and realised that Destro would not be, and that maybe he would be an ally. He sought him out and proposed some sort of allegiance. So yeah, kind of playing out much as you would expect, really. So there wasn't really a massive surprise to this sequence for me.
I liked, speaking of, like Duke's bit of dialogue where he gets to be very smart and figure something out that we know, so he can be an expert. Destro has a bit of that here, where in the panel under the holographic change, Destro says, "I was aware of the imposture from the moment he arrived. I saw it as an opportunity to feed disinformation." I'm doing my Worf. I saw it as an opportunity. Here's my Michael Dorn. I saw it as an opportunity to feed disinformation back to whoever sent him, Captain. And
this interesting use of a word here, imposture, not impostor, the person doing the deceiving, but imposture, which is the describing of the act or the instance of pretending to be someone else in order to deceive others. Not a common word.
I have never seen that word or heard that word, I don't think ever. And I momentarily thought it was a typo. And then I thought, oh, I bet this is Hama, trotting out a big word, because the characters in this comic sometimes do that. And then I thought, yeah, that's probably it. I like how the issue ends. The bit with the two, what are they? Cocktail waitresses?
Yeah, they're the casino bats, yeah.
The casino bats.
I think with the first male one that we've seen, they've all been female up to this point.
Yes. Them just dropping out of a mamba, I think, is funny and weird and a little scary, because they outmatched the Joes, and the Joes are on the run, and there was that earlier bit of dialogue. What was our plan when we got here? Something like dig in and wait until dark? And Muskrat says, I think it's Muskrat, "Gotta admit it sounded good when I said it." And, a few pages earlier, when he suggested that, I thought, yeah, cool, they're going to get to the beach and they're going to get away. Or they're going to get to the beach and they're going to meet up with their reinforcements, in a sub or on a shark, or, mobile battle platforms just been dropped in. Or they're going to dig up a box on the beach that they left with a bunch of weapons, and they'll get out of this. But no, they don't. And, there's still room for something that we've seen before to happen that would be fun, but not a big surprise. Maybe they're captured, and in 2 issues, the ninjas go get them. Or maybe they're going to, get out of there on their own. I sure hope they don't immediately get strapped in the brainwave scanner. I do feel like that's been done a lot. But, this is also a place where is Helix sort of a cyborg? Does she have a chip in her brain?
No, I don't believe so. I think she's just a bit like a savant, that she's super clever and able to kind of think ahead. Not in this case, but...
But her specialty, her file card, she's a master tactician, right?
Right, yeah. I had a look on Wikipedia, on the G.I. Joe wiki, and that has Helix's speciality as total organic battlefield awareness. I did think that there was more originally on that card than there actually was. I think it was just expanded out via some profiles in the comics and that kind of thing.
a scene like this, I feel like, Hama will start to develop a subplot, and he's going to pull in between 1 to 5 Joes. And usually 1 or 2 or 3 of them are characters we've seen a lot. And then he'll sprinkle in 1 or 2 characters that we don't see a lot. But he's also thinking, man, every character is someone's favorite. Who hasn't been in the comic for a while who I can drop in here? Or, well, this scene is in the, insert location, Arctic, underwater space. Who should go on that mission? And so seeing this unusual combination of 4 Joes is, just sort of different and fun. And I'm sort of excited for everyone where, one of these characters is their favorite and Helix is not my favorite. And I didn't need her to join the Arah universe, but she very much did in a Larry Hama written miniseries, although he didn't write those backups. Although I did like those backups, I did. So, here's an opportunity for Hama to take a newer character who has not a lot of baggage or backstory and sort of invent what he needs to out of her. I think of Helix a little bit like Molto and, help me out, who are the other new characters?
Molto, Sherlock, Mongoose, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots.
That Hama could almost make up anything for her backstory or for her to do, and it wouldn't, run afoul of anything because there isn't a lot.
Mm-hmm. These casino bats sort of jumping from the plane, bursting out from under the sand and sort of lifting up the ferrets did remind me of something though, Tim. It reminded me of the sequence from G.I. Joe the movie where Nemesis Enforcer sort of burst out from underneath the ground and sort of lifted up a Havoc and sort of shook it about.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I'll do one too. This reminds me of that shot that's from a Deke episode. Is it from I Found You, Evie? But it's in the main title of the desert scorpions popping up out of the sand to surprise whoever's in front of them. Although they don't then flip a vehicle. 2 more thoughts on page 10, this scene where Dawn gets the bad news. 3 more thoughts. 1, just a small, nice bit from Psych Out saying to Dawn, if you need to talk, I'm always here for you. Absolutely, he would be physically in that scene. You'd have your mental health professional at that meeting where you give them bad news. And you give them bad news in a neutral space like the mess hall, and you'd give them coffee, and you do it sitting down. You don't give Dawn this news back in front of the blue glowing screen where Mainframe had pulled up the satellite footage. And Roadblock's making I have 4 things to say. Roadblock's making a giant sandwich. And it's the G.I. Joe mess hall, which made a starring appearance on the cover to IDW's A Real American Hero issue 193, which along with the cover to 199 ranks as the most unusual G.I. Joe cover ever. And that will definitely be a trivia question at our next anniversary Talking Joe trivia quiz. And then at the bottom of this page, after Psych Out makes that kind offer, Dawn has a beat. There's a panel with no words, and she just looks down. She just looks away, and Pelletier tilts the camera. It's a Dutch angle so that she looks sort of upright, even though she's sort of leaning forward and turning her head away. And some artists are really good with action poses. Some artists are really good drawing equipment, swords and machine guns and vehicles. And some artists are really good with facial expressions and facial body language. And man, Duke looks sad here, and Psych Out looks concerned. And in these 2 panels on the bottom, Dawn looks really sad. And there are not a lot of wordless panels in Larry Hama's G.I. Joe. Yes, I know silent interlude, but the other 300 and some issues, it tends to be a book where people talk and do stuff, and sort of nothing happens in this panel, and a lot happens in this panel.
Hmm. Let's before we score it, I just had an observation, which is basically nothing to do with this issue, but a little bit to do with this issue. It's what's not in this issue. We saw Hawk in the sort of summary pages of 301 introducing the cast, but I had a thought that we've not really seen anything of Hawk yet this series, this relaunch series, and probably not for a good long while before that. He's just not a character that we've seen a lot of, given that he's a significant character and, you know, ostensibly the boss of G.I. Joe.
Yeah. Until you just said this, I had sort of forgotten that he hasn't shown up. I think, you know, we could do this with a lot of characters. There are a lot of marquee, you know, where's Major Blood? Where's Scrap Iron? Certainly Hawk has done more than those two guys in the 300 issues. I do think it might speak to the ongoing challenge for the writer of this book, which is, you know, if you have an issue where 20 characters appear, it might be like 306, where you and I say, man, not a lot happens. Just a lot of guys are showing up for brief scenes. And if you have an issue where fewer characters show up and more happens, people might write in and say, where's my favorite character? This comic keeps focusing on the same 7 guys.
Yeah, the thought was kind of triggered by a reaction to a post that I made which had the new G.I. Joe #1 with Duke on the front cover, and the poster sort of said, why is Duke, you know, the most important character on that front cover? You know, Hawk is the leader. And I thought, well, actually, if you think back to Arah, Hawk was a big deal in those first few issues, but then in the recent history, in the IDW Arah era, certainly the last 100 issues, he's barely featured at all. So Duke very much is, you know, he's the man at the desk in the pit directing people and stuff like that, where there's a leader figure, it does tend to be Duke rather than anyone else.
Hawk is a general, and this comic is not about the brass.
Yep.
This comic it's not about a general talking with other generals or handing down orders. It's about the first sergeant and a bunch of, you know, E5s and E6s and E7s mostly going on missions. And there actually isn't, unless Hama wants to do, you know, a scene with, I don't need more of the jugglers, and Hawk can certainly join a mission occasionally, but it's not realistic that he would. So I think the sort of rules for this comic are that we don't see Hawk a lot.
Yeah, and you know, if he was doing something, what would it be? He'd be sort of dealing with the political fallout of this Cobra Island becoming, you know, active again and having this zombie bomb detonated on it. It'd be sort of trying to manage politicians around the fact that there's a town in mid-America which is a front for a terrorist organization, and what else? You know, probably still dealing with the fallout of the fact that there's a senator who's been brainwashed by Cobra and is under their command, and there was an assassination of a senator under Cobra command in the Capitol building itself not too long ago. Or, you know, all of these kind of things that are kind of a general dealing up into the, you know, politicians kind of has to deal with and firefight, while the Joes can actually get on with the combat on the ground.
And to use that Energon universe comparison, Hawk has had 2 appearances so far in the Energon universe. And in one, he's in an office talking to Duke. And in the other, I won't describe it because there's a bit of a spoiler, but he's talking to 2 heroic characters in a headquarters that's not quite an office, but, you know, he's delegating. And in the cartoon, is it D-Day at Alcatraz? I forget. There's a Deke episode where Hawk uses his jetpack, the 1989 figure, I forget. And he specifically says, he makes a reference to that, the fact that he's older. And that, you know, it's a little harder to do this now. Or the implication is that he's older than the Joes. The implication is that he hasn't done a lot of battlefield stuff. But, in that case, he's got an action figure to sell, so we got to make an episode about him. And his action figure has a jetpack, so he's going to do some fun jetpack stuff.
Jetpack.
And, and in Rise of Cobra, it's not just comics, who's the hero? Duke, not Hawk.
Cool. So if we score this one, I think it's a solid issue. Team's doing a bang up job. Looking forward to what's coming next. I'll go a solid 7, I think, on this one.
Yeah, me too. 7.
Right. So next time on Talking Joe, we will be covering the latest issues of Arah as they come out. 308 is out on July the 17th. And then we'll also be exploring the world of the Energon universe. The world of the universe? Anyway, we'll be continuing to explore the Energon universe comics as well. And as time allows, we'll also be wrapping up our coverage of the Devil's Due era of comics and more besides. We've still got a fair amount of content from the floor of Joe Fest that will be coming out as well. Right, so you can find us in the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website, which has links to those places. We've got a group on Facebook discussing the latest issues and news. We're on Twitter and Instagram, where I share the latest happenings. And we're also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Ryan, Simon, Chris, and Joe, who are all getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. Definitely at the moment, with some of that content from coming out of Joe Fest, they'll be getting to see a fair amount of stuff a lot earlier than everyone else. So good time to be on the Patreon. Tim, where can people find you when you're not talking to me about all things G.I. Joe?
Video essays at our YouTube page, at Atomic Abe, my brick and mortar comic book store, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. Looking forward to seeing your Joe Fest coverage very soon.
Yes.
Yes. Have you written it? You were writing as you were going, were you?
Yeah, parts 1 and 2 are just about done. I'm putting in some photos, and part 1 should be up in a couple of days.
Cool. Right.
Because no one's interested in reading about me at the library, that's for sure.
I'm saying nothing. I read it. Interesting
Thanks.
as always. But yeah, I think it's a less mainstream blog post.
Post something from the toys. Post a drawing by Ron Brudat.
Yep. Do you probably see the stats and see what's the most popular thing? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't look at the stats as much as I used to because it's always disappointing.
I think your website must be quite well search engine optimized though, because it does quite often pop up in the feed whenever I'm searching. Okay, so I think that is us all done talking about A Real American Hero, issue 307. But until next time, remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
laters.